My parents refused to take my newborn while I was lying in a hospital bed after a car accident, and 10 years later, they showed up at my door begging me for money. But what they didn't know was that someone had already decided their fate long before that day. And when the truth came out, it didn't just shock them. It destroyed everything they thought they were entitled to. I remember the exact second everything went wrong. Not the crash itself, not the sound of metal folding in on itself, but my baby crying in the back seat while I couldn't even move my arm, because just minutes before that, I had made a call I wish I never made. "Mom, can you please watch Emma for a few hours? I just need some help today," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the exhaustion that had been eating me alive for weeks. There was a pause on the other end, the kind that already tells you the answer before it comes, and then she sighed like I had just asked her for something unreasonable. "Your sister is having a tough day. We're taking her out. You'll figure it out." That was it, no concern, no hesitation, just dismissal, like my 8-week-old daughter didn't even exist in her world. I remember gripping the phone tighter, feeling something crack inside me, but I still tried one last time. "Mom, I really need you." And that's when she said the one sentence I can still hear clearly even now. "You chose to have that baby. It's not our responsibility." I didn't respond after that. I just hung up, staring at the wall for a few seconds while Emma kept crying in her crib, and something about that moment felt different, final, like a line had just been drawn and I didn't even realize how much it would cost them later. I picked her up, held her close, and told myself I didn't need anyone, that I could handle everything on my own, but life has a way of testing that kind of confidence at the worst possible time, because 20 minutes later, I was sitting at a red light, barely able to keep my eyes open, when everything spiraled out of control. The light turned green, I pressed the gas, and out of nowhere, a truck came flying through the intersection. Too fast, too late to stop, and the next thing I knew, the world flipped sideways. The impact was violent. Glass shattered, metal screamed, and my car spun so hard I lost all sense of direction. For a few seconds, everything went quiet, like the world had been muted. And then I heard it, Emma crying. That sound cut through everything, snapping me back into reality. My head was pounding, my arm burned with pain, and there was smoke rising from the front of the car. But none of that mattered because all I could think was, she's alive. I turned, forcing my body to move despite the pain, and saw her in the back seat, terrified but okay, and I don't think I've ever felt relief like that in my entire life. But that relief didn't last long, because as the sirens got closer and people started gathering around the wreck, a new fear started creeping in, the kind that doesn't hit you all at once, but slowly sinks in. I had no one to call. And lying there, trapped between the wreckage and reality, I realized something that scared me more than the crash itself. This wasn't the worst part of my day, not even close. The paramedics pulled us out within minutes, but everything after that felt like a blur, bright lights, rushed voices, questions I could barely process. But the only thing I kept asking over and over was, my baby, is she okay? And when one of them finally told me she was fine, just shaken, I felt my body give up completely, like it had been holding on just for that answer. At the hospital, they took Emma somewhere safe while doctors worked on me, and that's when the silence hit, the kind that forces you to think about what comes next, and for me, that meant one thing. I had to make that call again. I didn't want to, but I didn't have a choice. My arm was fractured, my head still spinning from the concussion, and there was no way I could take care of an 8-week-old baby like this, not alone, not tonight. So I grabbed my phone with my good hand and dialed my mom, staring at the ceiling as it rang, actually hoping that this time would be different. She picked up on the third ring, already sounding annoyed. "What is it now?" she said, and for a second I couldn't even speak because something about her tone made me feel like I was interrupting her day instead of calling for help. "Mom, I've been in a car accident," I said quietly, my voice shaking despite everything I was trying to hold together. "I'm at the hospital. Emma's here with me. I need someone to take her for the night." There was a pause, not concern, not shock, just silence, and then she exhaled like I had just confirmed an inconvenience. "Are you serious right now?" she said, her voice sharpening. "Vanessa is in the middle of a meltdown. We're trying to calm her down." For a second, I thought I misheard her. I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," I repeated, slower this time, like maybe she didn't understand the situation. "I can't even hold my own baby right now." And that's when she said it cold, flat, without even a hint of hesitation. "You're always so dramatic. It's just a car accident. You'll be fine." Something inside me went completely still. Not anger, not even sadness, just this empty, quiet realization that I had been lying to myself for years about who they really were. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "You're not coming?" She didn't even pause this time. "No, your sister needs us more." And then she hung up. Just like that. No goodbye, no "Are you okay?" nothing. I stared at my phone for a long time after that, like if I looked at it long enough, it might somehow change what just happened, but it didn't. And in that moment, lying there with a broken arm and no one to turn to, I understood something I had never fully accepted before. I was completely on my own. But what I didn't know yet, what none of them knew, was that someone else had just found out what happened that night, and he was already on his way. About an hour later, just when the hospital room had gone quiet and I was trying to figure out how I was going to manage everything on my own, the door suddenly opened without a knock, and I saw someone I didn't expect, my grandfather. He stood there for a second, scanning the room, his eyes landing on me, then on the empty space where Emma's crib should have been, and I could tell instantly, something wasn't right. "Your mother told me you were fine," he said slowly, his voice calm but heavy in a way I had never heard before. I swallowed, trying to sit up despite the pain. "I was in a car accident," I said, and even saying it out loud felt unreal. His jaw tightened slightly, and without another word, he walked over and pulled a chair next to my bed, sitting down like he wasn't planning to leave anytime soon. "Where's the baby?" he asked. "The nurses took her for now," I replied, my voice softer this time, because for the first time that night, I didn't feel completely alone. He nodded once, then leaned back, studying me carefully, like he was putting pieces together in his head, and after a moment, he asked the question I had been avoiding. "Did you call your parents?" I hesitated for just a second, then nodded. That was all it took. Something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not confusion, just quiet anger. "And?" he asked. I let out a small, bitter breath. "They said Vanessa needed them more." For a few seconds, he didn't say anything, but the silence wasn't empty. It felt controlled, deliberate, like he was holding something back. Then he leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on his cane, and said in a low, steady voice, "Don't worry about anything tonight. I'll take care of it." And the way he said it wasn't comforting, it was final. The next morning, everything felt different, not because my situation had improved, but because for the first time, someone was actually stepping in without hesitation. My grandfather had already been back before I even fully woke up, speaking to the nurses, arranging things, making sure Emma would be cared for while I recovered, and when he walked into my room again, he wasn't asking questions anymore. He was making decisions. "She'll stay with me for a few days," he said simply, like it wasn't even up for discussion, and honestly, I didn't argue, I couldn't. I trusted him more in that moment than I had trusted my own parents in years. But what I didn't realize at the time was that he wasn't just helping me, he was paying attention. Later that afternoon, I overheard him on the phone just outside my room, his voice low but firm, asking questions I hadn't even thought to ask, about where my parents had been, what they had told the rest of the family, why no one else seemed to know what had really happened. And the more he listened, the quieter he became, which somehow felt more dangerous than if he had been shouting. When he came back inside, his expression had changed, still calm, still controlled, but there was something behind it now, something deliberate. "Rest," he told me, adjusting the blanket slightly like nothing was wrong. "Focus on getting better." I nodded, too exhausted to think much of it, but as he turned to leave, he paused for just a second at the door and added, almost to himself, "Some things need to be set right." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant, but looking back now, that was the moment everything quietly started to change, and none of us realized just how far he was willing to go. Over the next few days, while I was stuck in that hospital bed trying to recover, my grandfather moved quietly but deliberately, like someone who had already made up his mind and was just waiting for the right moment to act. He took Emma home with him, made sure she was safe, fed, cared for things my own parents hadn't even considered, and every time he came back to visit me, he brought updates that should have comforted me, but somehow didn't. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. There were moments where I caught him watching me, like he was seeing something he hadn't noticed before, and once, when I asked him if he had spoken to my parents, he just gave a short nod and said, "I did," without offering anything else. That silence said more than words ever could. Meanwhile, I started getting small pieces of the truth from other relatives, things that didn't add up. Apparently, my parents had been telling everyone that they were constantly helping me, that I was struggling because of my own bad decisions, that they were stretched thin trying to support both daughters, except none of it was true. They hadn't helped me at all, not with the baby, not with bills, not even with something as basic as showing up when I was in the hospital. All of their time, all of their money, all of their attention had been going to Vanessa. And when my grandfather found that out, he didn't confront them, he didn't argue. He just went quiet. Completely quiet. And if there's one thing I learned about him that week, it's that his silence wasn't weakness, it was a warning. Because while I was focused on healing and figuring out how to rebuild my life from that moment forward, he was already thinking 10 steps ahead, and whatever he was planning, it wasn't something that could be undone. When I was finally discharged a few days later, reality hit me all over again the second I stepped out of that hospital, my arm still in a cast, my body sore, and a newborn depending on me for everything. But this time, there was one difference. I wasn't walking into it completely alone. My grandfather drove me home, helped me settle in, even stayed longer than he needed to, quietly fixing small things around the apartment like he was making sure I wouldn't have to struggle more than necessary. And before he left, he handed me a small envelope. "For anything you need," he said, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. But when I opened it later and saw the amount inside, I realized he had done more for me in a few days than my parents had in years. Life after that wasn't easy, not even close. There were nights I barely slept, days I worked through exhaustion, moments where I felt like I was drowning trying to balance everything on my own. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered that hospital room and the choice my parents made. And slowly, something inside me shifted. I stopped expecting anything from them. I stopped hoping they would change. And instead, I focused on building something for myself, for Emma. Months turned into years, and what started as survival slowly turned into progress. I picked up extra work where I could, learned new skills, and eventually took a risk on something small, an idea that didn't seem like much at the time, but felt like a step forward. And while my life was slowly coming together piece by piece, my parents stayed exactly the same, still chasing after Vanessa's problems, still pretending everything revolved around her. They didn't notice my progress. They didn't ask about Emma. They didn't show up. And for a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, until one day, out of nowhere, after years of silence, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in a very long time, and something about that moment told me this wasn't just a casual call. This was the beginning of something they never saw coming. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, watching my mother's name light up like it hadn't been years since we last spoke, like nothing had happened, like that night in the hospital didn't exist, and for a moment, I actually considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me, because people like that don't call unless they want something. So I answered. "Hello," I said, keeping my voice neutral, and there was a brief pause on the other end before she spoke. But this time, she sounded different. Not warm, not apologetic, just careful. "Sarah, we need to talk," she said, and the way she hesitated told me everything I needed to know. I didn't respond right away, just waited, letting the silence stretch until she finally continued. "Your father lost his job," she said quickly, like ripping off a bandage, "and Vanessa, she's in some financial trouble. Things are not good right now." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. Years of ignoring me, years of choosing her over me, and now suddenly, I existed again. "What do you want?" I asked plainly, cutting straight through whatever performance she was trying to put on. Another pause. Then finally, the words I had already been expecting. "We were hoping you could help us, just until we get back on our feet." And there it was. No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just need. I leaned back slightly, my eyes drifting across the room, Emma sitting on the floor, peacefully playing, completely unaware of the conversation that was about to change everything, and for a split second, that hospital memory came rushing back. Her crying, me helpless, and my mother's voice saying, "Your sister needs us more." I tightened my grip on the phone, not out of anger, but clarity. "You should come over for dinner," I said calmly, and I could almost hear the relief in her silence before she quickly agreed, not realizing that this wasn't an invitation, it was a setup. Because while they thought they were walking into a second chance, they had no idea they were about to face a decision that had been made years ago, and once they saw it, there was no going back. 2 days later, they showed up right on time, like nothing had ever happened, like we were just another normal family meeting for dinner, and the moment I opened the door, I could see it on their faces, that subtle shift when reality doesn't match expectations. The house, the neighborhood, the way everything looked, it wasn't what they remembered. My mother's eyes moved quickly, taking everything in, while my father stood a little straighter, like he was trying to figure out how things had changed without him noticing. And Vanessa, she looked annoyed more than anything else, like my success was somehow inconvenient for her. "You've done well," my mother said as she stepped inside, her tone forced, almost careful, and I just nodded, letting the silence do most of the work. Dinner was quiet at first, filled with small talk that felt artificial, like we were all pretending there wasn't something bigger sitting between us, waiting to be acknowledged, and eventually, my father cleared his throat, glancing at me like he was rehearsing what to say next. "About the situation we mentioned," he began, his voice slightly strained. "We were hoping you might be able to help us out, just temporarily." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood up slowly and walked to the other room, leaving them sitting there in that uncomfortable silence. And when I came back, I was holding something in my hand, a folder. I placed it gently on the table in front of them, not saying a word at first, just watching as their expressions shifted from confusion to curiosity. "Do you remember Grandpa?" I asked finally, my voice calm but steady, and they all nodded, though something about the question clearly caught them off guard. "Before he passed," I continued, sliding the folder slightly closer to them, "he made a decision." My mother reached for the papers first, her hands moving faster now, flipping through the documents as her face slowly lost color, and for the first time since they walked in, I saw something real. Not confidence, not expectation, just shock. And that was only the beginning. She kept flipping through the pages like she was hoping she'd misunderstood something, like if she read it fast enough the words might change. But they didn't, and I watched the exact moment it hit her, the slight tremble in her hands, the way her posture shifted. The silence that followed when she realized this wasn't something she could talk her way out of. This isn't right," she said under her breath, almost to herself, before looking up at me with something between panic and disbelief. My father leaned over, grabbing the folder, scanning the documents more carefully this time, his expression tightening with every line, while Vanessa just stared, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. "He transferred everything," I said calmly, breaking the silence before they could, his savings, his investments, the property, all of it. My mother shook her head immediately. "No, he wouldn't do that to us," she said quickly, like denial was the only thing holding her together. "We're his children." I held her gaze, steady and unshaken. "Not anymore," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "Not after what he found out." That was the part that changed everything. The room went still again, but this time it wasn't confusion, it was fear. "What do you mean?" my father asked slowly, his tone sharper now, like he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. I leaned back slightly, letting the moment stretch just enough to make it sink in. "He knew," I said, "about the lies, about how you told everyone you were helping me, about how all your money was going to Vanessa while I was struggling alone, about the hospital." My mother's face went pale. "We didn't think," she started, but I cut her off before she could finish. "Exactly," I said, and for the first time, there was a hint of something colder in my voice. "You didn't think." Vanessa suddenly spoke up, her voice sharp, defensive. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean you just get everything. We're still family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for how little she understood what was happening. No, I said quietly, you're not. And the silence that followed was heavier than anything that had come before. My father slammed the folder shut like that could somehow erase what was inside it, but it didn't change anything. The truth was already sitting between us on that table, breathing in the silence he couldn't control anymore. So, what is this supposed to be? He asked sharply, his voice rising for the first time. Some kind of punishment? I shook my head slowly. No, I said calmly, it's not punishment. It's consequences. That word hit harder than I expected, because none of them had ever lived with consequences before. Not really. My mother's eyes were fixed on me now, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. We raised you, she said, her voice breaking slightly. We gave you everything you needed. I almost laughed at that, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned forward just slightly. Everything. I repeated quietly, you mean like the night I was in a hospital bed after a car accident with a newborn crying in my arms, and you told me I was being dramatic? Her lips parted, but no words came out this time. Vanessa shifted in her seat, uncomfortable now, like the air itself had changed. That was different, my mother finally said weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced anymore. I stood up slowly, walking a few steps away from the table, giving them a moment to sit with it fully. No, I said, turning back, it wasn't different. It was just the first time I realized where I stood in this family. The room went completely silent again, but this time it wasn't just shock, it was realization sinking in, heavy and irreversible. My father rubbed his face, exhaling sharply like he was trying to reset the situation. So what now? He asked, quieter this time. I looked at all three of them, one by one, letting the weight of that question settle. And then I said the only thing that mattered anymore. Now, you leave. And for the first time in their lives, they didn't have anything left to say. My mother let out a small, shaky breath like she couldn't quite accept that the conversation was already over, and for a moment she looked at me the way people look at something they assumed would always stay the same, only to realize it doesn't belong to them anymore. Sarah, please, she said softly, her voice losing that earlier authority. We can fix this. We can talk properly. But I didn't move. I didn't react. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. My father stood up slowly, pushing the chair back with more force than necessary, his frustration finally breaking through. You're really going to do this to your own family? He asked, like the problem was my response and not everything that led to it. I met his eyes without hesitation. I already lived through what you did to me, I said quietly. I'm just not repeating it. That line hit differently. I could see it. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was final. Vanessa scoffed under her breath, grabbing her purse like she was ready to leave the moment she realized she wasn't getting what she came for. This is insane, she muttered. You're acting like we abandoned you or something. I turned to her slowly. You didn't act like it, I said, calm but sharp. You did it. For the first time, she didn't respond. Not immediately. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy, until even she looked away. My mother reached for me one last time, her voice breaking now. He's gone, Sarah. Your grandfather is gone. Don't let this be how it ends between us. And that was the moment everything inside me went completely still, because I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge anymore, and it wasn't about anger. It was about choice. I looked at all three of them standing there in my house, waiting for a version of me that no longer existed, and I said quietly, it already ended a long time ago. You just didn't notice. And then I stepped aside, opening the door, not out of rage, but out of closure. They stood there for a moment longer, like they were still expecting me to change my mind, like the version of me they used to control would suddenly reappear and undo everything I had just said, but it didn't happen. My mother's eyes lingered on me one last time, searching for something familiar, but all she found was silence. You'll regret this, my father said finally, not loudly, not aggressively, just tired, like it was the only thing he had left to offer. I didn't respond, because I knew regret wasn't something I was going to feel. Vanessa walked past me first, brushing her shoulder slightly as she passed, like even now she needed to make a point, but it felt empty, smaller than she probably intended. My mother followed slowly, stopping just before the door, her hand resting on the frame like she wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the right version of it. We're still your family, she said quietly, almost like she was reminding herself more than me. I looked at her for a long second, then answered simply, family doesn't do what you did in that hospital. That was all it took. She nodded once, barely, and stepped out. My father was the last one to leave. He paused at the door, turned slightly like he might speak again, but instead just exhaled and walked out without another word. And then it was quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels finished. I stood there for a while, not moving, just listening to the absence they left behind, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything from them anymore. I turned back inside, closed the door slowly, and saw Emma playing in the living room, completely unaware of what had just happened, but smiling anyway. And in that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. They didn't lose me that night. They lost access to me a long time ago. They just finally found out. I stayed standing for a few seconds after the door closed, not because I was waiting for them to come back, but because my body had gotten used to bracing for chaos every time they left or entered my life, and for the first time, there was none. No ringing phone, no last-minute guilt, no manipulation disguised as concern, just silence. Emma's laughter pulled me out of my thoughts as she stacked her little toys on the floor, completely unaware that something massive had just shifted in her world too. Except for her, nothing felt like loss. That's when it really hit me, not like a dramatic realization, but something quieter, final. I wasn't losing a family that day. I was closing a chapter that had been hurting me for years without me fully admitting it. I walked over and sat beside her, brushing her hair back gently, and she looked up at me like nothing in the world had ever been wrong. "Mommy, are you okay?" she asked, simple and innocent, and I smiled, really smiled this time, not the kind I used to force through pain, but something lighter. "Yeah," I said softly, "I am now." And for the first time, I meant it without hesitation. Because sometimes closure doesn't come with apologies or explanations or people suddenly changing who they are. Sometimes it comes when you finally stop waiting for it. And as I sat there with my daughter in a quiet house they no longer had access to, I understood something I wish I had learned much earlier. The moment you stop begging to be chosen by people who already made their decision is the moment you finally start choosing yourself. That night felt different in a way I can't fully explain. Not lighter because everything was perfect, but lighter because I finally stopped carrying people who were never carrying me back. I put Emma to bed, and for a while I just stood in the hallway listening to the quiet of my own house, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels earned. My phone stayed silent. No new calls. No follow-ups. No attempts to rewrite what had already been said. And for the first time in years, that silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like peace. I thought about everything that had led here, the accident, the hospital, the calls that were never answered the way I needed, and I realized something simple but heavy. They didn't suddenly become strangers that day. They had been acting like strangers toward me for a long time. I just kept hoping it would change. I sat down on the couch, finally letting myself breathe without waiting for the next problem to appear, and I understood that healing isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It just slowly replaces the weight you didn't realize you were carrying. And maybe the most surprising part wasn't what they did. It was how I survived it, built through it, and still ended up here without them. Before you go, if you've ever experienced something similar or this story hit you in any way, leave a like and subscribe. It really helps support more stories like this, and I read every comment, so tell me what you would have done in this situation. Because sometimes the real question isn't what they did to you, it's how long you're willing to let it define you.